Hi, everybody. Good late morning to you all. So, fake news. It is clear, a global story that has occupied a great deal of our attention, rightly so, for the better part of this year. We've always had some form, right, of fake news, whether it's the hyper-partisan content or hoaxes spread as long as we've had distributed media. But I think we can all agree that the spread of fake news today, the speed, the scale, the nature of how it's shared, makes today's fake news something altogether different, prompting alarm and requiring a collective effort to address it, which is why I'm delighted to welcome today's panel to help us take a look at the dimensions of the problem, cultural, economic, media, technological, and perhaps lead us in the directions of some solutions. So I'm going to start with examining the dimensions of the problem through the lens of your shared experiences. And Campbell, Brown, and Jon Steinberg, I want to start with you. To what extent is this a tech-driven or a social media-driven phenomenon?
Do you want me to go first,
John? You go first.
Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here. So I'm the head of global news partnerships at Facebook, and I'm relatively new, about 3 months, but having spent most of my career in journalism prior to this. I would say first, fake news has been around since the beginning of time. But it has certainly become a huge point of focus for us at Facebook in the last many months. And let me start by saying, we do not want false news of any kind on the platform. It undermines our credibility with our community. It's a horrible thing for us. So we are doing everything possible to make sure that the content that's on Facebook is authentic and it's real. And it's a huge focus for us right now. I'll give you a quick overview of how we think about it and how we're approaching this. There are really two kinds of false news, and I am using false news intentionally because I do think fake news has taken on all kinds of new meanings. So I just want to be clear about what we're talking about. False news, the kind of things that are typically hoaxes, what we're finding is most of it is financially driven. So this is actually kind of a good thing because we know how to get at it. It's very similar to how we would go after spammers on the site. So what our teams are trying to do is disrupt the financial incentives. So for example, this is like if you see a story and it has a really provocative headline, and the intent is to make you click on that headline, and it takes you to what we call ad farms, where they're just trying to get you to see the ad so that they can make money. This is disrupting those financial incentives can do a lot to get this kind of stuff off of our platform. So there's a big focus on that. The second piece, which I think is a little more troubling for all of us, which is when organized groups are using misinformation and false news to try to manipulate discussions or have some sort of impact on civic engagement. And that we are approaching in a different way. We have security teams who are working on this and who are trying to identify accounts that are false, that are created for this precise purpose, and remove those accounts. And there's a real emphasis on this, especially around elections. So we're doing a lot of work in Germany and France.
And so I might have you hold that thought in terms of solutions, because I think we're going to spend a lot of time kind of drilling down into what some possible solutions are.
I just want to make the point that it's, on the technical side, it's not a simple problem, and there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think we're trying to approach it in a comprehensive way.
And I definitely want to get into that in detail.
Okay.
Shortly. So, Jon.
Yes.
Your business is business news for millennials,
That's right.
distributed digitally. To what extent so you're in the tech space, you're in the new media space.
And I did BuzzFeed before, so.
So you're really in the new media tech space. To what extent is this a technologically driven phenomenon?
I think overwhelmingly so. And first of all, I think for Facebook, this has been unintentional consequences. There's obviously, the company's a good company with no intent in actually causing this. But there are two things that really stand out to me that caused this. The first was instant articles caused a huge problem. People didn't really know the brand of the news source they were looking at. And despite what your politics are, mainstream major news companies almost entirely do not do false or fake news. The New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, they may get things wrong where they issue corrections, but they don't do false news. So people's heads were like scrambled eggs on Facebook. They didn't know what they were reading, where it was coming from. Everything looked the same. The New York Times versus the New City Tribune all looked the same, so it confused them. The other thing that Facebook did, and this is where Facebook has a lot of responsibility, is that the company's obsessed with engagement. More articles, more clicks, more time on site. And what they did was, rather than what the cable systems have, which is a neighborhooding, news channels here, entertainment channels here, sports channels here, they stuck it all in the news feed. And it basically created, rather than a supermarket where there was fresh produce and poultry, they stuck a chicken breast in the middle of a snack aisle, right? And when confronted with that, nobody wanted the chicken breast, because who could resist Doritos and Twinkies when it's all around you and it's all there? Then in their obsessive quest for engagement, they decided that short videos with no sound on and text on the screen was the preferred way for us to consume information. My mother said to me the other day, she said, why are there all these Facebook videos with text on the screen and something really eye-catchy in the first few seconds? And it occurred to me, I was like, Mom, that's interesting. You didn't wake up on Tuesday morning and be like, oh, I'm just dying for crappy little Facebook videos with text on the screen, right? So in the quest for engagement, anything substantive got pushed to the side, and real news got kind of crowded out by Twinkies. That's the other problem, too.
And that's a user problem, which we'll also address a little bit later. So, Rebecca, to what extent is mainstream media, admittedly by Jon's description, not the primary disseminator of false news, to what extent are they responsible for the rise of this phenomenon?
I mean, thank you for having me here, and as a representative of mainstream media, I would say that there has certainly been growth in social media away from the mainstream players. And this is something that at the Times and everywhere we're really trying to tap into and really, in a sense, struggle to establish a direct connection with the reader. The Times would never purposefully spread anything that is a lie. And in fact, the Times has invested a lot of resources and major events to really call out what are facts and what are not. I think what got really tricky during the election, and I think we do need to talk about the US election in some detail, is that there was no way on social media platforms to give a greater weight to something that was in a mainstream media publication versus something that wasn't. And suddenly, in one of the most notorious examples, the Pope endorsing Donald Trump was just spread everywhere. And I think what's happened, in a sense, since the election makes me hopeful, because I think that many people have realized finally that in order to promote quality journalism, they actually have to pay for it. And this is something that as journalists we wished for many years. And the Times just announced this morning that in the first quarter we added 308,000 new subscribers, which is the highest number in history. And thank you.
And by the way, Rebecca, that's a phenomenon that started right after the election, because your fourth quarter also saw increases.
The fourth quarter also saw increases almost to that level, and more than 2013 and 2014 combined. So today, the total subscribers to the Times has reached more than 3 million for the first time in history. And this has all happened as the president is, of course, tweeting quite regularly the failing New York Times. And so I think that, but I'm happy also to say that this is not just the New York Times, it's the Wall Street Journal, where I worked for many years. I'm on the board of the Columbia Journalism Review. They're seeing a ton of interest in subscriptions there, and I think that everyone, in a sense, has had a wake-up call that what happened? And we don't want to live in a world where when we look on our phones and we have no idea what's true and what's false. And I would say that Facebook, and Campbell, I'm glad you're here, and Google do bear some complicity for what's happened because, like it or not, you are now media platforms. And we should also talk about the journalism business model because Facebook and Google continue to be a very big threat to traditional newspapers. The Times is thankfully doing quite well. Unfortunately, so many local papers are not. There are news deserts out there. I looked right before I came on the stage. 25,000 reporters have lost and editors have lost their jobs in the past 5 years. That's a decline of 38%. And there's no question that in those news deserts, the opportunity for fake news is exponentially greater.
Rebecca, thank you. So Stephen and Scott, as representatives of the political world, to what extent has the political climate and the culture in Washington propelled fake news from into the cultural phenomenon that it has become right now? Stephen, I'll start with you.
Well, it's not just the New York Times that's been adding subscribers. I mean, the Weekly Standard has added 308. If you've added 308,000, we've added 308 new subscribers. No, it's a little higher. It's a little higher than that. So let me, if I can answer your question.
Just take a moment. So, and you attribute that subscriber growth to the desire of consumers to support and consume high-quality journalism.
Yes, I think that's absolutely. I mean, we've made very clear at the Weekly Standard, I mean, we're a conservative journal of opinion. We make no apologies about the fact that we're a conservative journal of opinion. We will continue to be a conservative journal of opinion, but we care about facts. We want people to be making arguments based on facts, logic, and reason, and we think it's important that we have a common understanding of what those facts are in order to have a real, substantive, productive back and forth about how we solve the problems that we face as a country. If I can just answer your question maybe in an indirect way with a brief story. I was giving a speech last summer at a conference of business executives, wealthy business executives. The speech ended, it went fine. I made an erroneous prediction about the election results. Took some questions in the audience and then had a group that came up and said hi afterwards. And the first person in the group was a very successful CEO of a company. And he said, I want to ask you a question, but I didn't want to ask it in front of the whole group. And this is a center-right crowd. And I said, okay, what's your question? And he said, how many people on the Clinton murder hit list were actually killed by people directed by the Clintons? And, you have this moment, and I waited for the guy to say, are you just kidding? Or smack me on the shoulder. And he didn't. And the thing that was striking about it was a moment later, the second person in the line, who happened to be the sort of chief rival of this other CEO, said to the person who'd posed the question to me, you stole my question.
Wow. Oh.
And my wife and I talked about this when I got home, and I said, this is really bothering me. We went out to dinner with some friends, very sophisticated friends, center-right types. We told them this story. And the wife responded by saying, that's crazy that people of sort of that level of sophistication would believe something so insane, such a conspiracy theory. But did you ever find out what that box was on the back of Hillary Clinton during the debate? Was she getting the answers piped into her? And you think, wait, what? This happened a couple more times. But so I think that just goes to show how deeply ingrained the willingness to accept this fake news or these conspiracy theories is. But I disagree with Rebecca to a certain extent. I mean, I do think the mainstream media bears some of the blame for getting us to this place. I mean, there's a reason that people, I would say conservatives in particular, are so skeptical of the mainstream media. And it's not just because talk radio has beat up the mainstream media for years. It's because, as often as not, conservatives, center-right folks turn to mainstream media channels or publications and don't see their concerns reflected in the kinds of news that's covered. And my argument about sort of media bias generally has always been that the bias shows up much more in the what's news question than it does in what's actually published.
And so therefore, do you think the distribution of fake news is bipartisan, or does it skew right of center?
Well, I think it's
Because
bipartisan.
you just gave several examples of, and I'm curious if you've had similar questions posed to you, Rebecca, at different events.
I mean, I think it's bipartisan. You can look at polls that show that, people on the left believe in UFOs at a greater proportion than people on the right. I mean, there's a willingness to believe stuff that shouldn't be believable. I think that crosses the ideological spectrum. But right now, particularly with Donald Trump in the White House, conservatives are sort of more eager to grab onto these things. There was a poll actually released this morning by Morning Consult, and I think it was a poll of 200,000 Americans, and the question was a simple one. Who do you trust to deliver the truth, the mainstream media or the Trump White House? And across all Americans, not separating out for political party, I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it was like 37% said the Trump White House, 24% said the mainstream media. So this is a bigger problem that I think needs to be addressed, and it needs to have the kind of self-reflection that I think media types love nothing more than to do this kind of navel-gazing.
That's
I mean,
true.
we love to talk about ourselves. But in all of the panels and things that I've read, it's lacking this kind of real introspection where people say, what did we do to get here? Why is it that so few people trust us?
If I could just jump in here, I do think there has been a fair amount of introspection, especially since the election. I mean, quite frankly, the media got it wrong, and there's no question that a lot of people in this country feel that the mainstream media does not necessarily represent their views. We're doing a number of things at the Times to try to, alleviate that, from sending more people to the middle of the country. Something that's been interesting is that we've launched this podcast, The Daily, which deliberately tries to represent both liberal and conservative. And there's something about a voice and podcast and listeners actually feeling and hearing the voices of people instead of through a filter of somebody's words. And it's just exploded in popularity since February and has had 27 million downloads. And so I think you're absolutely right. There's no question that media needs to look at, what role we play and how we can better reflect the attitudes, not just of the coast, but of people who, of everybody in this country, and the very serious issues that were raised in the election.
So Scott, talking about the White House, we can't do that without talking to you. You've written a book that explores the culture of DC that you portray as kind of inherently deceitful. So how do you address the question of, has our political culture, has our political climate contributed to, if not the explosion of fake news, propelling it into a global and national phenomenon?
Sure. And good morning. I should start off just to point out for the record, I have never been parodied by Melissa McCarthy. Nor, as Campbell can tell you, did I know you could use alternative facts at the podium. But it is good to share the stage here with this group, especially Campbell, rather than staying at the podium and having her out there interrogating me. But no, I did. My book really was a larger exploration of the political culture and where it was headed, and where it is today is, I think, far worse than where it was before. I think when you look at fake news, when you look at Donald Trump, those are symptoms of a much larger problem. Donald Trump just happens to be the most glaring symptom of what's wrong with the political culture and then the media landscape that needs to go through some changes too, as Steve and Rebecca were just talking about a little bit too. And then just the excessive polarization in the country. So I think you have to look at all those factors. I think there are a lot of people in the country that look at the situation and go, how could we elect someone like Donald Trump who is that dishonest, that casual with the facts, and that morally adrift, if you will. And I think that what has happened is that the culture created the space for his kind of populism to come in, and then a lot of his supporters are willing to overlook his excessive or his shortcomings, his willing to say whatever he wants, regardless of what the facts are, regardless of if you can substantiate them and so forth. And so, now we're at a point where, and Donald Trump understands, like every president does, that results are what matters most. And people are, his supporters felt so betrayed by the political system, by the elites, that they are willing to overlook all that because they say, hey, well, no one else has been helping us. So, we're going to let this guy, we'll overlook all those distortions, the unsubstantiated assertions, and so forth, if he can get us the results. Now, we'll see if he can do that. There's a long way to go in that process. But when you look at the political culture itself, we are at a point, and then this has been building for decades, that it's all about kind of a campaign. It's an endless campaign to kind of manipulate the media narrative to your advantage, to influence public opinion. And that's on a daily basis. That's what you do in a campaign. You're trying to win the narrative on that particular day and throughout the campaign in order to help elect yourself. And so you look at that, and you look at the political environment itself, where it's really politics is war. All is fair. And so people are looking at Donald Trump that support him and saying, well, all's fair. Say whatever you want, because this is all about winning and losing. And then the media comes into play. And I think that the trust in the media is so low, with trust in the media so low, that has opened the door more widely to fake news. Now, I think fake news is not a long-term problem. I think that you're going to have trusted sources, whether it's Weekly Standard, New York Times, or whoever else, that are going to come through that people will look to get accurate facts, accurate information, and so forth. But the media has been complicit in creating this landscape. You look at cable shows and the constant focus on Donald Trump during the campaign, the constant focus on him now, the billions of free coverage he got for that. With the focus being from the media standpoint on conflict and controversy, I'm less concerned about any bias that might be in the media. There's a bias toward conflict and controversy, and then people look at that and they have a perception, well, are you just trying to manufacture news in order to get ratings, in order to get audience share? And that's a real problem that you have to look at as well in this process and ask questions. And the media, yes, they do the navel gazing, as Steve pointed out, but I don't think the media is very good about critiquing itself and looking inward in general. And the media needs to do more to do that. And the New York Times has taken a number of positive steps by really focusing on, okay, what's the truth behind these claims? CNN's done that to some extent too. But there was a recent New York Times Magazine story just about a month ago that talked about the symbiotic relationship between Trump and CNN and how Trump made CNN. And it goes back to the campaign and how this was a mutually benefiting situation. And so people are looking at this, well, it's all just a game to Washington. It's all just a game to the media. Well, no, it's not a game. These are serious issues we're dealing with. I see military personnel here. I mean, we're dealing with war, the economy, things that affect people's real lives. And so we've got to get to a culture of candor where we have candor from our leaders. We don't have that today, but that's a larger issue.
So can we separate the two issues? Fake news, particularly fake news, as a term that's been weaponized, right, in our political culture, and as you use the term false news, and we're going to spend a little more time looking at ways that Facebook and others are addressing this. Can you solve false news while you're in a climate of fake news as a weapon?
Well, I think that ultimately people want truth and accountability, and that's the role of the media, truth and accountability. I think it was Tim Russert who said that the role of the media is the accountability of the government. I think that when the media gets focused not too much on the conflict and controversy, that becomes a bit of a secondary concern. Now, you've got to find a way to kind of make sure that doesn't happen, that it doesn't get diminished because of the focus on where it's kind of the erosion of the barriers between news and entertainment, if you will. That has continued to get deeper, and the erosion has grown deeper between news and entertainment. When you have cable shows talking about we want to model things after ESPN and the shows that they're doing, I have a little bit of a problem with that. And it opens the door, though, for other people to come in and say, well, we're going to be the ones that are going to be the trusted sources of news. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but this is not going away anytime soon. I think that you look at Jon down there in the end with Cheddar. I mean, they're focused on the millennial generation. This generation wants candor. They want openness. They want transparency. There's going to be change coming at some point. How quick we get there, I don't know. But you also need to have those elected leaders that are going to come in there and embrace candor. And we haven't seen that recently. And yes, Steve is right that it's both sides. I mean, it's not just the fake news, it's the false assertions. And that goes both ways. Both sides engage in that.
And just on Scott's point there, I do wonder sometimes if maybe we just have to write off a current generation in terms of the news. When you look at the cable news viewership ages, Fox is north of 70, CNN is mid-60s, MSNBC is mid-60s, CNN is mid-60s. There's no young people watching these networks, right? And there is a huge desperate need amongst these millennials. I mean, when we started Cheddar, everybody said to me, young people are not interested in business news. And that was the craziest comment in the entire world to me. Of course they were interested in Elon Musk and Airbnb, Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, Google. It was the most interesting, inspiring stuff in the entire world. We've brought on numerous senators and congressmen. We had on Governor Hickenlooper yesterday as well, too. The viewership is there. Is the viewership there in terms of the scale of a kitten doing a backflip into a pool? No, right? But, historically in the media and the distribution of media, there has been a sense of paternalism. There is a reason why Comcast and AT&T don't just put on 100 channels of tiny houses, despite HGTV being the third most highest viewed network in the world, right? So this goes all a long way of saying that I think the skinny bundles are happening now. I think the deals are happening now. Look at what Twitter announced yesterday. People in their 60s may just be overly politicized by these current cable networks, but those cable networks are sort of over.
And so therefore there's an opportunity
Yes.
for new brands with new brand identities focused around authenticity, accuracy, you fill in the blanks,
Yeah.
to emerge
Yeah,
for a new generation.
Absolutely, and most of us doing this have tried to take the Henry Luce approach of Time Magazine, which is you need the light and the shade, the hard and the soft. You need when we were doing BuzzFeed and it was all listicles and wacky stuff, we couldn't sell advertising because people want the scale of the wacky stuff, but they want the substantiveness of the real news. That's why there was always the argument that NBC and CBS News were cross-subsidizing the entertainment, right? It may go the other way. It's not entirely clear to me that people want to advertise against Fear Factor if NBC News is not on that network. I mean, somebody eating scorpions is not what GE wants to be next to, right? We need to recreate that model. The skinny bundles, Sling TV, our partner, DirecTV now, Comcast, these people are reassembling these bundles and they're looking to bring new people into that. So I think it will get fixed for people in their 20s and 30s. They're going to have Netflix, they're going to have Amazon, they're going to have a skinny bundle, and they're not even going to be watching Fox.
I guess I would slightly.
Sorry.
And then I am.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I would slightly disagree with that in that I think beyond the traditional and even the new video and TV entrants, I think that in a way this problem is getting worse with social networks because people are really in their own echo chamber.
Oh, but I'm not mentioning social networks. I'm very concerned about Facebook, but I think that skinny bundles where there's neighborhooded and there's news channels is distinctly different than social.
Totally.
Okay.
I think that has been a positive development, but we can't lose sight of the fact that for many people in their Facebook or Twitter feeds, they are really in an echo chamber and seeing their own worldview reinforced constantly. At the Journal, we did something called Red Feed, Blue Feed on Facebook, where we looked at what just a typical news event and what people who were conservative saw and what people who were liberal saw, and it was just stunningly different. And this is something that I think, quite frankly, we have not solved for yet. And I know right now, I mean, we're talking a lot about the US, but Facebook and Google are under tremendous pressure in France and in Germany. The regulators there are very concerned. You have, I think, 25 million users in France, and 30,000 accounts have been taken down. But the scope and scale of this problem, now that so much of news is being conveyed on social networks, is just tremendous.
Can I?
Yes.
There's like a list a mile long that I would like to respond to. But first, if I could just address the filter bubble issue, which we hear about a lot, that on social networks people are only getting one perspective. And I think you do have to put this in a historical context, which is oftentimes I hear people talk about, the filter bubble and how we long for the days of Walter Cronkite when we all had one newspaper and we all had a shared set of facts that came from that. But I would remind everyone that in the days of Walter Cronkite and one newspaper, there were no women or people of color in those newsrooms. So if you don't think that was a filter bubble, you are missing a very big picture. There is a filter bubble that has been around for a long time. And following on those heels were the cable news days when cable went in two directions and became intensely partisan. I happened to be caught in the middle of Keith Olbermann and Bill O'Reilly when I had a show on CNN. And all anyone was talking about then was the filter bubble that was created by cable news. So this is not a new phenomenon that is a Facebook problem or a Facebook-driven issue. And in fact, just so we can bring the data into this conversation, there was a study released by Stanford recently that showed that the people who are most polarized in this country do get their news from cable news and not from social media. And what we do know about Facebook is that one of the things Facebook does is it strengthens your weak ties, right? So were it not for Facebook, my friends and family in Louisiana, I would probably not be as in close contact with as I am today, because I live in New York City. By virtue of that, I have a much wider network of people I'm in contact with, and because of that much wider network, I get a broader political point of view than I would be if I were in my little filter bubble in New York City. So I disagree with the premise altogether, and I think if you think about it in the broader context, it's really important to note that we've come a long way, and diversity is complicated. And with it brings its own set of challenges, but I'd much rather be in this news environment than in one where we were only seeing a very narrow perspective of some 20 or 30 years ago.
So Campbell, let's revisit the issue of Facebook, which I think we all have to remember. This is a new form of media born before our very eyes, born not just in a generation, but in the past few years, grappling with unintended consequences of scale and velocity, the likes of which we have never seen. So can you briefly just give us the trajectory of the evolution of Facebook's recognition, understanding, appreciation, acknowledgement, and path towards solutions on fake news? And then I do want to talk about some of the possible solutions.
So Facebook has changed very recently. Mm-hmm. Our mission has changed. Jon is right. When Facebook started out, it was about connecting the world, friends and family first, and it was about engagement around that. It's only really been in the last couple of years, in the last year and a half, that Facebook has become a source of news and information for people. The community changed, and many decided, we want to get our news on Facebook. That wasn't something that was in the plan. It happened organically, and because of it, Facebook as a company has had to adapt and has decided to adapt and made an explicit, I don't know if any of you read this, Mark recently wrote a letter about the company's new mission that was as a result of this change, where he talked about informed communities being an explicit part of our mission now. It's not just connecting friends and family. It has to be about helping ensure that the communities that we are part of are getting good information. And that means supporting journalism. And that means trying to help journalism find new financial models that work. Because media, and in particular news networks, news outlets, journalism is going through profound disruption. And it is terrifying. Having spent 20 years in news, you know this too. Most of my friends are reporters, and none of us can predict what the future is going to look like. None of us even know what it's going to look like 5 years from now. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard in this environment to figure out what the business model is that's going to ensure journalism is still around and providing authentic sources of information. People like the New York Times are figuring out what their model is, subscriptions, and they're making enormous progress in that direction. And Facebook is now at a point, and this is new. I mean, the Facebook Journalism Project, which is what I lead, is something that launched a week after I started in January. But it is our mission now to work much more closely than we ever have before with news outlets to help figure out business models that work. So if subscriptions are the solution for the Times, we need to find ways to support that because there's clearly a big chunk of their audience on Facebook. So if we're not supporting their business model, it's bad for us if our mission is informed community.
So how might you support or drive people to subscribe to the Times?
Well, we're trying lots of different things, and we're in talks with the Times about what works for them, because it's not a one-size-fits-all model. But there should be ways in instant articles for people to be able to sign up. Right now we're testing a lot of different ways to do it. For people who work primarily in video, that's not going to be the solution, obviously. So we're testing things like mid-roll ads in video that hopefully can bring new sources of revenue to news outlets that are focused on video. I think, and Rebecca mentioned it, the hardest problem we have to solve, and to me it may be the most important, is what happens to local news outlets. Because part of the reason we're here today is to talk about how we find common ground again, and how we do get back to that shared set of facts. And to me, the best place to start is neighbor to neighbor. And that means at the community level. And that means not losing our local news outlets. And no one is facing more dire financial challenges than local news outlets right now. And I don't know what their model is. They don't know what their model is to survive. And it's something that I hope Facebook, and we're talking about a lot. We've just started working on this, but I think Facebook is uniquely positioned because community is something we're pretty good at, building groups to be a part of that solution. And this is a responsibility that we have, not because we're a news organization, we're not a news organization, but we are part of this news ecosystem. And that means we have a responsibility to the news ecosystem. And this hasn't always been the case. I mean, it's true. We have not done a great job of this because it wasn't part of our mission. It is now. And so there has been a sea change in the thinking and the actions we're taking to try to address it.
Just briefly before we get to solutions, I agree with Campbell. I mean, I think it's often very easy to blame Facebook or to blame Google and to point fingers, but I think what happens a lot of the time when you hear people doing that, whether they're news folks or average citizens, is this is blame shifting. News organizations blame Facebook so that they don't have to grapple with the problems that they're facing in exacerbating these problems. And fundamentally, I think citizens do this a lot. I mean, I pray that Scott's right, that ultimately people really do want truth and accountability, but I don't take that as a safe assumption at this point. Now, we're gambling what we're doing at the Weekly Standard on that presumption. We think it's true. We hope it's true. But it seems to me that we're living in a world where people are looking every bit as much for affirmation as they are for information. And people don't want to be challenged on some of their views. And they do congregate with like-minded people and don't seek outside sources of information and do live in these bubbles. And I think that's a problem, but it's a problem not because Facebook exists. It's a problem because of the way that we're separating ourselves. And it's just too easy, it seems to me, to blame Facebook as the mechanism for doing this.
But can I add one more piece of this? Because I want to make sure this point gets made somewhere. There is a piece of this puzzle that's not sexy, and so we don't talk about it a lot, and it's not something that's going to yield quick results, but it is an investment in news and digital literacy. And it's something that we did recently. We partnered with the industry, with advertising agencies, with academia and nonprofits to work on this, and we became a founding funder of something called the News Integrity Initiative. But its primary focus is educating people around this issue. My kids are never going to open up a textbook in their entire lives. Every piece of news and information they get is probably going to come from online sources like Facebook and others. And yet they're not being taught in school how to be discerning about the information they're consuming. They don't know the difference between the Weekly Standard and the New York Times and Cheddar. And this is a skill set that we didn't need to be taught because these choices didn't exist for us. So we have to develop curriculums for schools and make this a part of our education, both for adults and for our children, because these challenges, I think, are not going away, and if we don't address the fundamentals, the education piece, it's going to be a huge missed opportunity.
And I will say, I'm just going to shout out to some nodding faces in the front row who are Annenberg students. We have made this a core requirement across all of our undergraduate programs, a media and news literacy core course that teaches the critical thinking skills and something literally called a smell test with a series of exercises that one goes through to be able to differentiate false from accurate and appreciate context and motivation. And do you agree that, and I'm pointing to you, Jon, because
yeah.
you really traffic in millennials,
yeah.
that this is a requirement of the digital age?
I don't really think anybody should need journalism knowing something's real education. I mean, I think it's great that you're doing it, and I respect the effort, but I think that I don't think things should be so confusing that someone actually needs to be told what news is, to be honest with you. I think that I like the Hemingway line, I think a clean, well-lit environment where you go and things are presented, I think that may be paternalistic of me, but I guess that an education program is equally paternalistic and less scalable. That would be my answer.
I might just jump in here. I think, and you mentioned accountability. I would just like to say that it is just a fundamental function of the press anywhere, whether it's in New York or in Bay City, Michigan, where I'm from, or any place in the world, to hold government and power and companies to account. And that is an expensive endeavor in many respects. I think it's great to hear the shift in mindset at Facebook. And it's going to be really interesting to watch this roll out. You just announced plans today to hire 3,000 people to help with the video problem in terms of Facebook Live, and that is to be lauded. I might also say that is larger than any newsroom in the United States. The New York Times has 1,300 reporters around the world, and we went to 150 countries last year. And so Facebook is now officially a media platform. But the thing we all need to reckon with is that advertisers are by and large voting with the digital platform. So 85% of all growth in digital was to Facebook and Google. And so that just becomes this, this constant struggle for anyone really trying to do like the basic accountability journalism. And Campbell, as we were talking before, in many state houses now, there are barely any reporters left.
But back to what's on us as the media, we're responsible for our own economic future. And Facebook is not going to solve the revenue problem for us, just like YouTube didn't solve the revenue problem for us. I don't have the answer for articles. It's not the problem that I'm working on right now. I recognize it's a huge issue. But on video, the genie has not yet been let out of the bottle. And in video news and in video cable channels, they've done a pretty good job of not letting their stuff go away for free. And we need to do a better job of coordinating amongst ourselves. I had this professor at Columbia Business School, Bruce Greenwald, and one of the examples he gave was, in real estate brokers forever have managed to maintain 6% commissions. They will cut commission in some cases on a really expensive mansion out here, but by and large, they maintain that. Real estate firms have never been really prosecuted for antitrust violation because they're so dispersed that they couldn't possibly coordinate if they want. But they know if one of them cuts commission, they're all going to cut commission, and it's going to become a price war. This all goes a long way of saying that when the New York Times launches a live business news network to compete with CNBC and Bloomberg, I would hope they wouldn't make it free. I would hope they wouldn't make it free. I'd rather compete with them getting the deal on Hulu, me getting the deal on YouTube TV. But if they break ranks and they go free, they'll run themselves into the poorhouse doing it. They'll take down my business in the process, and we'll all be left with nothing, and the platforms will be even more powerful.
So your solution is brands, trusted brands, holding their content close and protecting or developing or protecting their revenue streams.
We need to be like Les Moonves, okay? Les Moonves thinks 2.5 Men is like the greatest thing ever, and he's not giving that for free to anybody, right? Like, he's holding out for the highest possible prices for 2.5 Men. We need to do the same thing. We got to be very judicious about what we put out there for free and make sure we get paid.
Mm-hmm. So, question for all of you. Solutions on the table, where would you put your money? And by the way, is there anybody up here who is in favor of considering regulation of new media who many believe are monopolies by virtue of their reach, whether it's Facebook reaching 77% of the digital mobile audience, or Google driving 80 some odd, upper 80% of advertising revenue? Is there a legal solution here that we should be pursuing as a nation?
I don't think there's a legal solution, but I think it's interesting what's been happening recently with advertisers and the problems that first surfaced in the UK and now in the US in terms of advertisers not wanting their brands next to objectionable video. That gives me confidence that this is going to be worked out in the workplace, and I know that Google and Facebook are madly working on algorithms to try to prevent this from happening. But I think that it comes back to trust, and that is just a huge conversation and dynamic that's happening in the media environment right now. The Times, it's no coincidence that we did an ad campaign. Truth is hard, and trust is something that in the fake news world, I think, whether it's Cheddar, the Weekly Standard, or Facebook, where we really have to work very, very hard to re-earn. But I don't think anybody feels that the government getting involved is probably going to help.
I would agree. I would hope that would be a last resort. I think that eventually that things are going to work itself out in the marketplace. And going back to, well, two things. One, I would echo what Willow said about the teaching students critical thinking, and that's at the heart of our Jesuit education at Seattle University, and it has been for a long time of a Jesuit education, and so we've got to be really focused on that. I mean, particularly in this day and age, when their attention span is so short, questioning everything and seeking what the truth is so critical. But I'll go back to a little bit to talk about what Steve was talking about people looking for affirmation of their own beliefs. Yes, there is certainly a segment that does that, but I still believe in, it's the reason I got involved in politics in the first place, that you can build that kind of 60% of the voters out there, or the citizens out there, really want to come together around strong leadership, around common problems, around seeking the truth and understanding what's accurate and what's happening in Washington. That's the reason I went to work for then Governor Bush in the first place. He was a bipartisan leader who built that supermajority, if you will. So I think there is a large segment out there that does hunger for where we need to move. It's a question of how we get there, and I don't think it's through regulations or legal framework or legal issues.
Mm-hmm. Campbell, on the menu that you have ahead of you at Facebook, anything that you're particularly excited about, optimistic about, to lead us to a solution here?
I think the fundamental issue is trust. It's trust for us, and it's trust for the news media in general. Meaning, if we allow false news to thrive on our platform, then we will lose the trust of the community on Facebook. And that would be horrible. We don't want that to happen.
So in essence, you're protecting your brand by fighting the spread of fake news on Facebook.
Absolutely. But in addition to that, I do believe that this is not, we are not, I do believe we are inextricably linked to the news organizations. And, maybe you don't think we have to figure out the business model, but I think we have a responsibility to help. I really do, if it's part of our mission to want to have an informed community. We have to make sure that this works out, and that means trying to help figure out the trust issue as well. And we have started working groups with a number of news organizations to just brainstorm ways to restore news credibility in general. I mean, you've seen these Pew studies that have come out about how people feel about the media more generally. And that does not serve any of us well. And so whether it's through us being more transparent, all of us being more transparent about how we're gathering news and our storytelling and sharing that information with people, we're doing a lot of brainstorming about how we as a platform can help news organizations who want to work on these issues too, because I do think we're in this together. It's a partnership, whether we want it to be or not, it is a partnership, and there's no way to separate the platforms from the media at this stage. And so it's critical that we link arms and try to solve some of these problems.
Does that include bringing traditional news organizations into the process of designing algorithms and creating new products so that new product launches are infused with the spirit and values of journalism and
that-
not retrofit
Right.
with the spirit.
Yeah,
of
that's a great point. That's the #1 first goal of the Facebook Journalism Project has been collaborative development of news products. So we have now created teams of people who are working with the Facebook engine. It's literally engineer to engineer in many cases, developing products now so that they can weigh in before we do something that news organizations say, wait a minute, that doesn't work for us. So that is, that's a critical part of the work we're doing. And that started about 3 months ago. And we've made a lot of decisions based on the feedback we've gotten from the beginning. And it's a process, but I think it's taken a change of mentality on the part of Facebook, but it's not happening overnight. We still have a ton of work to do on this front, but we're trying to get there.
Rebuilding that trust requires an understanding of what led to the erosion of the trust in the first place. And this is where I disagree with so much of what's happened in this, sort of post-election media navel-gazing period. I don't get the sense that media organizations have really grappled with this kind of stuff. I flip channels and I see Dan Rather talking about the problem of Donald Trump and fake news. Now, maybe to journalists that's not problematic, but to a lot of people, given what happened with 60 Minutes and Dan Rather's problems and standing by what was fake news, that's a problem. People I talk to, conservatives, my parents in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, they see Dan Rather and think, why is he getting a platform? Why is he able to talk about this? And that, I think, partially explains the gulf there, is he's seen as credible by the people who are putting him on air, plainly, but he's not seen as credible to millions of Americans across the country.
So I think that fake news, in a sense, becomes a weapon, President Trump uses, the term fake news when he doesn't like a story. Business executives use fake news when they don't like a story. And certainly lots of liberals and people across the political spectrum use it. I think that going back to trust. The Times did its truth campaign, in a sense, after talking to focus groups and realizing that people had no idea really what went into videos, into journalism, into investigative pieces like the one we did on Bill O'Reilly that took months of work. And I do think there needs to be much greater transparency about the process of stories, about how stories are vetted, and even the most controversial stories, how they're arrived at. But it is, fake news is almost become, just a convenient excuse for people to throw out when they disagree with something. And I think, as representatives of a media news organization, that's really our challenge.
And you were going to share something why it's relevant that we're having this conversation today.
Yes, today happens to be World Press Freedom Day, and I got this from Joe Pompeo, I must say, this morning off Politico. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in a video that he recorded to mark the day, "Journalists go to the most dangerous places to give voice to the voiceless. We need leaders to defend a free media. This is crucial to counter prevailing misinformation, and we need everyone to stand up for the right to truth."
And I think we're going to let those be the poetic last words. Jon Steinberg, Rebecca Blumenthal, Stephen Hayes, Campbell Brown, Scott McClellan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Willow.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.